Welcome to user training for the Cloud DPE Development Studio. This is Gene D'Angelo. For these training sessions, I am working on a client PC located in Southeast Florida, and I am signed on to a small server located in Plano, Texas. This session is broken into 3 parts, and this is part 1. In this session, I will review the fundamentals of building a program, or seed as we call it, in DPE Development Studio. The first thing I will do is I'm going to open up a seed to show you what an end product looks like. And as you can see, it's a hierarchical set of tabs. The main tab up at the top, where you can have other things like data and import templates and so on. And then below that tab, there's a series of tabs that represent processes where data is flowing in and out of each process. And many times data flowing, of course, out of one process and into another. In those processes, you have input and output tables, and those are designated here in the third level of tabs. The I designates an input, the O designates an output. This process has one table in, one table out. A very popular configuration is 2 tables coming in and 1 table out. This particular one, actually, the table coming in is actually brought in twice. And to see if I could find many of these are in fact that type of configuration because of the type of work we're doing here. So here is one where you have a different table coming, 2 tables coming in. This is an input table, here's a different output table, a different input table, and here is an output table. Here's another one here that has 2 input tables, one here, and then also 2 output tables. Now, just to review how this all fits together, I'm going to look at a slide briefly here, and this slide shows you the configuration, the architecture of a seed, one process at a time. So this is a process here. You can have as many input tables as you want. I've had 50 or 100 input tables coming into a process. Each input table can have its own filter, and each column coming in from each table can have its own formula that might modify the contents or even the data type of the column coming in. There's an operation that's performed on the tables. It can be any type of database operation. It's relatively unlimited in that form, and in a future session we'll go over some of those operations that you can perform. You can have multiple output tables. Again, here I've had many different output tables, as many as 20 or 30 output tables coming out of a process. Each of those output tables can have its own filter in terms of selecting what goes out. And each of the columns in the output table can have a formula which, again, modifies what that column contains as it goes out. And of course, you can have columns that are out that don't come in, in other words, calculated columns that you build specifically just to go out. Now, these processes are stacked one after another, and any output table of one process can be fed into the input as an input table in a future process. And this is the most common way you develop a seed. But of course, you can have input tables coming from externally in any future process as well. So that's how a seed is constructed. That's how this seed was constructed. It starts off with a table from outside, and then it puts out, and you can see this temp directory here is something we use as a default, which means that in this temp directory, anything you put out there during this session, when you sign off from the server, these tables disappear. And then you can, in this case, that table that comes out of process 1 goes into process 2. And another table goes out that's not in the temp directory. We want to save that table. And then in this process, you have that table that goes out of process 2, goes in twice in process 3, and another temp table goes out in process 3. Now, if we diagram this seed, we can see clearly the tables going in and out. Here, the input table, see this is bolded. That means this table comes from outside the seed. And then this table here, which is not bolded, means that it is input in a future process. So here you can see the inputs and outputs, and there's formulas here as well for the filters that are on this table. So this table is being filtered with this formula. And this diagram is very handy in terms of seeing what tables go in and out. And if you follow it along, you will see that in some cases, here is another bolded table here that is coming from the outside. But a lot of these tables, this input table here, is actually output from a previous process, and so on. So this is a good way of looking at the tables flowing in and out, the formulas that I mean the filters that are on those tables in and out. So it really gives you a good idea of the data flow and the restrictions, constraints on the data flow as the data is processed throughout the seed. So that's a handy tool for viewing it that way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start from scratch to build a seed. So I'm going to open up a new seed, and I can name it here, and I'll just call it test seed. Seed, not deed. Okay, so we have our first process, and now we want to bring a table in. The way we would bring a table in, we can do that several ways. One way is to simply go over here and take a table off from the Tables Explorer and drag it in. We can then say add all columns, and you can see this is populated now with all the columns from that table. Now if we go back and let's just delete this and bring that table in again, and this time I'm going to say do not add all columns. And so from the from area here, I can select the columns I want to bring in. Let's just say we want to bring in the NPI, the name, and the city, and the state, and the type, and so on. So now we brought those fields in and not the other fields. We can then right-click here and add an output. The output name is defaulted. This name is structured. It has a lot of several pieces to it, so that if you have multiple outputs, this prevents any duplicate table names from going out. I usually take out this part because as long as I'm only having one or two tables going out of any particular process, then I don't need the other parts of the defaulted name. Now I can run this, and it just simply read the table in and read the table out, but only with the fields that the columns we had selected. Okay, we can also, of course, let's say we want to sort it by name, so we could sort this by name, and then when we run it this time, you'll see that the names are now indeed sorted. Some of the names start with 1 here, so but if you scroll on down, of course, you'll get the alphabetical list of the names. Right, so that's how we bring a table in. We can also, for example, do a union. Now, unlike in some systems, I can do a union here, and I'll take the sequence off of here, and then when I do a union, what I have to do is over here and select union. I have to have a sequence on one of the columns, at least one of the columns, and then choose union in this drop-down box on the operation. This is now going to give us a distinct operations, give us just one unique output row for each state. So if I run this process now, you'll see that we have the states in order. We only have 61. And now there's some, obviously some states in here that are like the possessions, Puerto Rico and so on. but you'll see each one of these only occurs once. Now, one question comes up, well, when you have that type of thing, since these other fields are character fields, so they're not being totaled or anything like that, how does it decide what goes out? Well, in this case, you'll see up here, this is a little shaded, but there is a first and last, and basically what it does, if you look at the table coming in, and you look at all of the, let's say, all of the values that have AK on them, all the rows that have AK, what it's doing is choosing the one that occurred last in the table coming in. So this physician reference might have had several. So in fact, let's do something here to make this more explicit. I'm going to make it back to normal, and I'm going to put a filter on here and say that the state is equal to AK. Run this process now, and by the way, I get a notice here that it noted that I already had the table open, and you shouldn't run a seed if the output table is already open, because it can't then write over it. But it gives me an option to close the table, which I'm going to close the table, and it puts it out. Now we have only those rows that have Alaska in them, AK, and there's 2,281, quite a few. And if we scroll down, we'll see that the last one is this from Anchorage, this Kathleen Machad. So now let's go back and make this a union again and take the filter off. You could leave it on too, just get one row out, of course, and run this again. And now if you look at for Alaska, we get Anchorage, Kathleen Machad. So it took the last one that in the table as it occurred. This was the last value. So this is the way it handles multiple rows with the same value that you have a union on. This comes in very handy in many different areas. There's some systems that don't even allow you to do this. But this is very handy. Okay. Now let's say we want to bring in another table into this same process. Here's one called utilization. I'm going to choose that one. And instead of dragging it in, which I could do just as well, I'm going to copy the name. And over here, I'm going to say add input. And it gives me a space here. And I could even drag the name into this space, or I could just paste it in here, or type it in, or whatever, and then say OK. Now I have a second input table coming in, and perhaps in this case, what I want to do is bring in some information from this table alongside the NPI. So let me take this off. And up here, I will, not formula, I want to bring in from this table the NPI. And you'll notice this changes to an asterisk, which means that we're bringing in from both tables a column by the same name in the same work field. So called work fields. In addition, from that second table, perhaps I'll bring in a HCPCS code and the allowed and paid amount, and maybe the line service count. Okay. So you'll see that the columns that are brought in from the second table have a T2 by them in the from column here, and the ones from the first table have a T1. And if you hover over, in fact, the table, it says alias equals T1 here. Here it says alias equals T2. So this tells you here that these fields these columns came from this table, and these columns came from this table, and these columns came from this table. Now, if we went through and let's say we changed the name here to just say provider, right? Now it actually shows that the work field provider comes from the column named provider name in the first table. So that's how this designates this. And up here, if we change this to ID number, say, now this shows that this comes from NPI in table 1 and NPI in table 2. If these actually had different names, which would be fine, then you would see for each alias, you would see the different column names used in that particular table. So now if what I want to do, let me just sequence these by the ID number now that I have this laid out, and run it. And what this will do will bring in both tables together. It's going to be a little bit long table because I believe the second table has about 18 million rows in it, and so it's going to be a pretty big table of 19.4 million rows here. By the way, this gave us I'm not showing this every time, but these are statistics come out every time we run a seed. It gives you the statistics, tells you what rows coming in, what rows going out, the speed, and the total time. In this case, 8.6 seconds to bring that information in and put it out. So now we have for each ID number, each NPI and provider, we have the information here about the name and address, city and state, and their type. And then over here, we have the list of all the services they performed. One thing, these are summaries, and in fact, one problem, we didn't bring the year in. In fact, let me go back and actually bring the year in from table 2. So I'm just going to go back here. It's very easy to bring the year in and then run it again. And we'll get the new take another 8.6 seconds or so to bring that information in and put it out again. And now we'll have the year because the table includes both 2012 and 2013, 8.6 seconds again. And here you can see that they did the HCPCS 99222 in 2012 for this amount of money billed and paid, 115 services. Down here they did the same service in 2013, 142 times for this amount of billed and paid amount. But here we have we've sorted the two tables together, and we have the name here, and then followed by the different services. So that just show you how we can put two tables together and sequence them on the output. This is the end of part 1. We will continue our review in part 2.